The Last Candle. The small village of Raziel was nestled in the dark, quiet valley, covered by the dense woods that surrounded it like a protective barrier. Few had ever ventured into the village, and even fewer ever returned with stories. The people who lived there were as strange as the land they inhabited. They were descendants of an ancient bloodline, one steeped in mystery, secrets, and the kind of power that should never have been disturbed. It was the year 1712. Time moved slowly through this village, and it is where history had gone. It had become merely a whispered legend. It was a whole year since Eliezer Levian had left to this small place. He was but a young man, younger than 25 at any guess, with dark eyes, a serious face, and all an aura of an unwanted wisdom. His parents had died in circumstances no one understood, leaving him with nothing but an old house in Raziel, a house that no one would dare enter unless forced by the most desperate of circumstances. The house was centuries old, with stone walls that had given way to the passage of time, its windows black with the shadows of long-forgotten memories. It stood alone at the edge of the village, looming over all the other houses like some silent sentinel, watching with a presence that made one uneasy. The villagers never mentioned it, but they knew the history of the house, just as they knew every corner of Raziel's history. Eliezer, however, never dreaded the house. Instead, he was attracted to the stories hidden within the walls. It was in these walls where the legacy of his family hid a legacy that nobody from the village dared mention. It was late in one autumn evening when Eliezer found the candle. He had been exploring the attic of the old house, digging through forgotten boxes of his family's belongings. His fingers brushed against an old, intricately carved wooden box. It was dusty, its surface worn by age, but it had an unsettling weight to it. He hesitated before opening it, an inexplicable sense of dread filling the pit of his stomach. Inside the box, nestled in layers of ancient cloth, was a single candle. The candle was different. Its wax was black, its wick unnaturally long, and its surface marked with symbols Eliezer didn't recognize. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Yet, what struck him the most was its glow. Even in the dim light of the attic, the candle seemed to shimmer with unnatural, almost hypnotic light. It beckoned him closer. He stretched out his hand for the candle, his fingers trembling as they brushed against its cold surface. A jolt of energy ran through his arm, sharp and electric, as if the candle were alive. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he wondered if he should put it down and leave it untouched. But then a voice whispered to him, soft and compelling, urging him to light it. "Light it, Eliezer. You must see what is hidden." He did not know the voice, yet he knew it, like a familiar darkness, from his past, his family, or something far, far worse. Without any thoughts, Eliezer struck a match and took it to the wick. The candle lit immediately, casting ominous shadows against the walls of the room. For that moment, nothing seemed to happen. And then it started to chill in that room, drop in its temperature, which brought a creep down Eliezer's spine. A flame emanated from the wick while growing brighter. Its glare became more prominent as it seemed something within its thick core of wax was breaking free. The attic seemed to shift. The air grew heavy, as if the very atmosphere of the room had thickened, making it harder to breathe. And then, as the candle burned brighter still, something caught Eliezer's eye. A shadow, dark and long, creeping along the wall. But it was not a shadow cast by the candle's light. No, this shadow was something else, something far older. The room began to spin, the walls warping and twisting as if they were no longer bound by the laws of reality. Eliezer stumbled back, his heart racing. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the shadow, which was now moving toward him, its form becoming more defined with every passing second. In a panic, he reached out and snuffed the candle's flame, plunging the room into complete darkness. The shadow vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted, leaving Eliezer gasping for air. His hands trembled as he stood in the cold, quiet attic, his mind reeling. What had he just seen? Was it real? Or was it a figment of his imagination, brought on by the strange energy of the candle? He didn't know. But he did know this. He could not let the candle stay in the house. There was something evil about it, something that should never have been stirred up. It was a part of something much bigger, something far older and stronger than he could ever comprehend. The next morning, Eliezer made his decision. He would leave the village. He would take the candle and bury it deep in the woods, far away from Raziel. But as he was about to leave, something in the house stopped him. A voice, soft and distant, whispered from the darkness of the hall. "Do not go, Eliezer. You are meant to find what lies beyond." The candle's flame flickered in his mind, its glow calling him, promising answers to questions he hadn't even known he had. He paused at the doorway, a chill creeping over him. Was he ready to uncover the truth? Was he ready to face what lay beyond the veil of the unknown? The wind howled outside, and the village of Raziel stood still, waiting. The last candle had been lit, and with it, the darkness that had long been dormant would soon awaken. The days that passed after the discovery of the candle passed in a haze. Eliezer could not shake the eerie feeling that clung to him, like an invisible cloak of dread. The events of that night in the attic ran through his mind, played and replayed over again. He had tried to convince himself of it being just the candle, just the strange atmosphere of the house, a trick of the mind, nothing more. But deep within, he knew it was much darker. The village of Raziel seemed no different than it had before, except for something that had been shifted. The air was heavy with unsaid tension, as if the village itself knew something Eliezer didn't. The trees surrounding the village now looked darker. Their branches seemed to twist like skeletal hands, as if they tried to clutch him. The wind that had been once a gentle caress now came carrying a cold whisper to make his skin crawl. Eliezer had secreted the candle in a far corner of his small room, but it felt as though it was looming over him at all times, reminding him that whatever forces were associated with it had not been released yet. He felt its pull, its call, growing stronger each day that passed. And then came the 7th night. He had been walking through the village, trying to shake his mind clear of any thought, when the atmosphere changed. It was as if everything within his surroundings had turned dumb, the usual cacophony of nature sounds. A bird here, the gushing of wind there, the distant murmur of the river, fading out into a suffocating stillness. The streetlights flickered, casting a long shadow across the cobblestone road. His pace quickened with it, an uneasy knot that had tightened in his stomach. He stopped as he passed the old stone well by the edge of the village. He could not explain why, but something attracted him toward it. The well stood there for as long as anyone knew, silent, forgotten, and a reminder of an earlier time. No one mentioned it, nor did anyone dare step closer to it. However, Eliezer felt led to stand before it. Then he heard it, a faint whisper, almost inaudible, as if being blown by the wind. It was a voice, but not any human voice. It had depth and gutality, as if it contained something old and forgotten about to rise again. There were no clear words, yet the message was unmistakable. "Come closer, Eliezer. You cannot help your fate." His heart pounded as he stepped back from the well, but the whisper followed him, growing louder and more insistent. The wind picked up, swirling around him as if it was trying to pull him toward the well. The whispers morphed into a cacophony of voices, all speaking in a language he did not understand, their tones filled with desperation. He turned and ran, but as he reached the edge of the village, he stopped. The candle, the last candle. It had been calling him ever since he had found it, and now he could not ignore it any longer. He knew what he had to do. There was no turning back. It was late at night when everybody in the village had gone home. Eliezer went back to the house, taking the candle in his trembling hands. Its black wax glimmered in the dim light of his room. He had made up his mind. The candle had chosen him, or maybe he had chosen it. Whichever way, he belonged to it. He took a deep breath and struck the match. He lit the wick once more, and with a flicker of flame, the chill filled the room. He had never experienced it this cold. Shadows seemed to stretch out, twisting, darkening, and growing even more oppressive. Thick with malevolent, ancient presence, the air thickened. The candle's flame burned brighter than before, casting strange, distorted shapes on the walls. The shadows moved as if they were alive, swirling in a grotesque dance that made Eliezer's skin crawl. And then, for the briefest of moments, the room fell silent. A figure stood before him in the middle of the room. It was tall, dark, with an indistinct form but unmistakable presence. Eliezer could not see its features, but he felt the eyes burning into him, like two coals. "Do you seek the truth, Eliezer?" the figure asked, its voice low and resonant, like the rumble of thunder in the distance. Eliezer's mouth went dry as his body froze. He could not speak. He could not move. The figure moved forward, and the shadows seemed to cling to it and wrap around its form, like a living cloak. "Everything has a price," it continued, filling up the room with its voice. "Are you ready to pay it?" Eliezer's breath hitched. He knew what the figure meant. The candle was not just an object. It was a gateway, a key to something far older and far darker than he could imagine. It held the power to unravel the very fabric of reality, to reveal the secrets buried beneath time itself. But what would it cost him? "I will do whatever it takes," Eliezer whispered, his voice barely audible. A smile creased the figure's face, though its eyes were hidden in the shadow. "So be it," the figure said. In that instant, Eliezer knew that the weight of the world rested upon him. He was no longer merely a man. He had been part of something much bigger, something that had awaited him. The last candle burned bright, and its glow had shown him the road ahead. But it was a path of darkness, the very path to the heart of the unknown. And as Eliezer looked into the candle's flame, he knew that once he crossed the threshold, he would not be able to turn back. The shadows whispered forward, urging him to take that first step into the abyss. The darkness that surrounded Eliezer after his encounter with the figure was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was suffocating, oppressive, as if the very air had been thickened with something ancient and malevolent. As he stood in the dim glow of the candlelight, he could feel the weight of the figure's gaze on him, even though its eyes remained hidden. He had chosen, a choice that could never be undone. The candle was no longer a mere object in his possession. It had become a part of him, and he a part of it. The knowledge that the figure had spoken to him, that it had recognized him, sent a chill down his spine. He had felt the power coursing through the room, a power that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. But now, as the figure faded into the shadows, leaving him alone in the flickering candlelight, Eliezer could not shake the feeling that something else had been awakened. Something darker, more primal. The whispers had returned, swirling around him like a storm of voices, each one speaking in an unintelligible language that filled his mind with dread. The days that went by only made Eliezer more reclusive. He couldn't concentrate at work, nor on his chores in the village. The whispers taunted him at every minute, and the more that passed, the louder grew the whispering until there was nothing else to be heard. Even the walls in his home seemed to have a vibrational quality, making it seem as though the house itself were alive. It was on the fourth night, just as the candle's flame began to flicker again, that Eliezer finally understood the truth. He had always believed that the candle was a key to something hidden in the depths of time and space. But now he knew it was more than that. It was a conduit, a bridge between worlds. And the figure, whatever it was, had picked him to open that bridge, to let loose what was on the other side. The air grew colder still, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow longer and more twisted. Eliezer's breath came in shallow gasps, his hands trembling as he reached for the candle. He felt its power, its pull, like a magnet drawing him closer. He hesitated for a moment, then, with an inevitability, he lit the candle again. As soon as the flame caught, the room shifted. The shadows, once stretching and twisting, now moved on their own. Swirling and coiling, they seemed like smoke tendrils. The air was thick with unnatural stillness, and Eliezer's heart beat within his chest. He heard the whisper again, but it was different this time. It was no longer just a voice, but a presence, deep and resonant, a hum that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of reality. It spoke not in words, but in feelings, in emotions too intense to be comprehended. "You have awakened us, Eliezer." The words reverberated in his head, and he stumbled backward, the legs beneath him buckling. His mind reeled with the force of the voice, heavy as a physical weight against him. He could feel the presence growing stronger and pulling at him, reaching into him. The shadows which had once seemed distant seemed to close in on him like a tightening noose. His vision went out of focus, and for a moment, he was no longer in his room. The walls receded from him and were replaced by an expanse of endless darkness. He was standing in a vast, empty void, his only companion the swirling, ever-encroaching shadows. And then he saw them. Eyes. 1,000 eyes, drifting in the darkness like stars at night. Some were big and gazing, others small and bead-like, but all were watching him. Their stare was unblinking, unyielding, as if they could see right through to the very heart of his soul. "We are the forgotten, Eliezer, the ones you brought back." Again, the voice filled his mind, and this time it was a roar rather than a mere whisper, thunderous sound vibrating through the bones. The eyes blinked one after the other. As they did, he felt the nausea wave crash over him, his stomach churning and vision swimming to make him stumble and lean against a post to catch himself. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision vanished. He was back in his room, the candle still burning in front of him, its flame now flickering wildly. The shadows were still there, but they no longer seemed to be merely reflections of the light. They were something else, something alive. They kept growing louder, more insistent, until almost unbearably loud. It's as if it crept into every little corner of his mind and filled him up with feelings and thoughts not his own. Fear, desperation, rage. All those things came rushing down him, threatening to drown him in a sea of feelings that were not his. "The price has been paid, Eliezer." The voice was no longer a whisper, but a command, a presence that filled the room, filled the very air he breathed. And then, in the silence that followed, Eliezer knew what he had to do. He had to go to the well. The well had always been a place of darkness and mystery in the village. Its depths seemed bottomless. No one had ever dared to approach it, fearing what may lie below. Now Eliezer understood that the well was not a place, it was a gateway, a passage to the other side, to the forgotten. He was told that a price must be paid, and that is just what he did pay for it. Still, more remained to be done. The last piece was the well, as this was the last act on the path begun by the candle. With shaking hands, Eliezer took his coat and walked through the village, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The whispers followed him, growing louder the closer he got to the well. It was as if the well itself was calling him, drawing him in. As he stood before it, the earth shook beneath his feet. The opening to the well seemed to swell with life, as if it were some living, breathing thing. Eliezer could sense the dark below, whispering for him, begging him to step forward. He didn't hesitate. Then suddenly, everything turned black. Eliezer stood at the edge of the well, the darkness devouring the faint light from the candle like a famished animal. The air around him was thick with the smell of damp earth, a putrid stench that clung to his skin and filled his lungs. He could hear the soft, rhythmic dripping of water from deep within the well, but it was as if the sound came from a place that was not of this world. It echoed strangely, distorting as it traveled up from the black depths, a constant reminder that the well was not merely a hole in the ground. It was a portal, a passage to something far older and far darker. The whispers had not stopped. They had followed him here, growing louder with every step he took. It was as if the very earth beneath his feet was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that threatened to consume him. The voices, now clearer than ever, swirled around his mind like a whirlwind, each one speaking in a language that was both ancient and forgotten. "We are waiting for you, Eliezer." The words came again, deep and resonant, as if spoken not by a man, but by the darkness itself. The tone was at once a warning and an invitation, which Eliezer could hardly resist, even if he wanted to. His fingers tightened on the candle, whose flame leaped wildly in the windless night. He moved forward without a thought, and his footsteps shook the earth. The well expanded, the entrance yawning before him to swallow him alive. Eliezer felt himself fall over into some sort of vertigo. For an instant he felt as if he was going to topple over. The ground might open its mouth to swallow him in. But he did not. He could not. The well beckoned to him, and he went toward it. The wind screamed through the trees as he peered into the abyss, his eyes straining to see anything in the darkness. But the well was deep, its blackness impenetrable. He could feel the pull of it, the invisible force that seemed to tug at his very soul. He knew in that moment that there was no turning back. A soft, almost imperceptible sound broke the silence, a whisper carried on the wind. He turned sharply, his heart racing. The figure had returned. It was at the side of the well. The shape was indistinguishable. It was dark and surrounded by shadows. The flame from the candle danced around the figure, casting a distorted shape that made the figure look taller and shorter than its true height. The outline of the figure's face could hardly be made out by Eliezer, but he could sense its presence. Its gaze locked onto him with a chill-inducing intensity. "You came, Eliezer." The voice of the figure was low, almost a growl, as it vibrated in the air, deep and humming. The eyes, those piercing, unseen eyes, seemed to bore into his soul as they searched for something inside of him. Eliezer swallowed, his throat dry, his hands shaking. "What is this place?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "What have I awakened?" The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a hand, pointing into the depths of the well. "It is not the well that calls you, Eliezer," it said softly, the words dripping with a strange, almost seductive quality. "It is the forgotten ones." He steps forward. He flickers in and out of existence, almost like he is not of this world fully. "You've unlocked the door. You have given them a way back." A chill ran down Eliezer's spine as he heard the words. Forgotten ones, whispers, eyes. All of it made sense now. The well hadn't been a physical location. It was a gateway, a portal to something far, far older, something that should have been sealed and hidden away forever. And Eliezer had let it out. He'd made a terrible mistake. The figure took a step forward, and Eliezer instinctively took one back, his heart beating in his chest. It wasn't the figure that scared him. It was what it represented. The thing waiting in the shadows. How long he didn't know, but it had waited for him. It felt like the ground beneath his feet shifted. The whispers became louder, filling his ears, pushing into his mind, until all he could hear were the whispers. His eyes blurred, the world tilting around him as if he were spinning in place. The candle flickered violently, its light dimming, and for a moment, Eliezer felt the world had gone dark altogether. And again the candle flared, and then the figure was gone. But the well was not dry. Eliezer could sense it. He could sense the presence, the stirrings beneath the surface of the earth. There was something there, something waiting, something ancient. The well had become a vessel, a conduit for the forgotten ones, and now they were no longer content to remain in the darkness. They had been stirred, awakened by Eliezer's actions, and now they were reaching out. The sound was a terrible, guttural scream rising from the depths of the well. It was an agony scream, as though pain were so great it tore at the fabric of reality. Eliezer took one step back, and he raised his hands to cover his ears as though in futile effort to stop listening. It was a scream ripped from his soul as the earth itself screamed out of torment. Again, the ground shook, but this time, the earth itself was not enough. Air was vibrating, as if reality was beginning to crack and rip apart. Eliezer's breath was coming in ragged, frightened gasps. He felt the power building, the pull of the well increasing. Without thinking, he turned and ran, his feet pounding against the earth as he ran back to the village, his heart racing. The scream echoed in his mind, a constant, unrelenting sound that would not let him forget what he had done. The shadows seemed to follow him, swirling in the corners of his vision, watching him with those unseen eyes. He could listen again to the whispers this time, but they came not just in his mind. It came from outside, about him, louder with each step he took. "You can't escape, Eliezer. The forgotten are free." The moon sat high in the sky. Its cold light shed long shadows across the village. Once upon a time, the quiet, peaceful town had become like an empty wasteland with hollow buildings, empty streets. It weighed on Eliezer's chest, the air he breathed heavy with an imminent sense of doom. He had tried to escape the terror, tried to outrun the consequences of his actions, but there was no escaping the truth. He had unleashed something ancient, something powerful, and now it was coming for him. His heart pounded in his chest as he hurried through the empty streets, the cold wind biting at his skin. The whispers had not stopped. They had only grown louder, more insistent. They were everywhere now, surrounding him, filling his mind, urging him toward the inevitable. "You cannot escape, Eliezer." He ran faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how fast he moved, he felt the presence behind him, getting closer with each passing second. It was as if the very air itself had turned against him, pressing in on him from all sides. The shadows stretched longer, the night growing darker, and the whispers seemed to seep from the very walls of the village. "They are coming for you." The voice was different now, more distant, more chilling. It was no longer the figure at the well speaking, but something else. Something far older, something that had been awakened by his actions. The forgotten ones were near. He could feel their hunger, their need to claim what was rightfully theirs. In his panic, Eliezer stumbled into the village square, his eyes darting around, searching for some sign of safety. But there was nothing. The streets were silent, the houses dark, the windows empty and cold. The village had been abandoned. There was no one left. Except for him. Ground quaked at his feet. He thought he heard some electric crackle in the air, though. Eliezer was out of his head because after all this, finally, the hour arrived. And now there's nothing for him to do. It was a done thing. The curse released only with one means, stop that cursed thing in one place, and that would be the well. Source of that shadow that came crawling up out of the guts of Earth. He needs to get back. But would that be enough? His mind was filled with doubt, but he had no choice. He had to face the well, face whatever had been waiting there, and somehow end the nightmare that he had unleashed. It was the only way to save himself, and perhaps the world. His legs moved forward, autopilot taking him step after step toward the center of the village and the well, silent as a sentinel, still standing with its black mouth wide open, waiting. With each step Eliezer took toward the well, it seemed the temperature fell and the air became thick and oppressive. The whispers grew louder, the voices now a cacophony of tortured souls, each crying out to him in a language he couldn't understand. His chest tightened, as if invisible hands were squeezing the breath from his lungs. The well stood before him like some kind of enormous beast, dark depths swallowing all light and hope. He stood at the edge, his body shaking with fear and exhaustion. His mind screamed for him to turn back, to run, to flee this place and never look back. But he couldn't. He had come too far, and there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. With a deep breath, Eliezer stepped forward. The ground seemed to shift beneath him, the earth groaning as if in pain. He could feel the power of the well growing stronger, the pull of the Forgotten Ones reaching out for him. The dark energy seemed to wrap itself around his body, tugging at his very soul. A flash of light illuminated the well, and Eliezer's breath caught in his throat. There in the center of the well, something stirred. A figure. It was shrouded in shadow, its form flickering in and out of existence, as if it weren't quite of this world. But Eliezer knew who it was. It was the figure from the beginning, the one that had appeared to him in his dreams, the one that had led him to this moment. "You have returned," the figure said, its voice a low, rasping whisper. "You have awakened us. Now, you will pay the price." Eliezer's heart ran like a stampede, but he didn't move back. "I didn't mean to," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." He titled his head, the black malevolent light dancing across his eyes. "Doesn't matter. The door's open now, and you can't close it." Eliezer's head was reeling. He was wrong. It couldn't be fixed now. The ones he forgot had been set loose, and nothing could undo what has been done. He knew then that he can no longer step back from that situation. The figure reached forward, taking up the air in its solidness and form. Eliezer felt the force, which he thought would eventually bury him. "It's too late, Eliezer." Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, its shadowy form enveloping Eliezer in an instant. The world around him seemed to explode in a violent rush of sound and sensation. He could hear the cries of the Forgotten Ones, the screams of countless souls that had been trapped in the darkness for centuries, waiting for their chance to escape. The shadows closed in, and for a moment, Eliezer felt himself being pulled into the depths of the well. His body, his soul, everything he had ever known was being consumed by the darkness. He struggled, his hands grasping at the air, but there was no escape. He was falling into the very heart of the well, into the embrace of the Forgotten Ones. But just as he thought he would be lost forever, there was a sudden, blinding light. A force greater than anything he had ever known surged through him, burning away the shadows, driving the darkness back. Eliezer felt his body convulse, his heart pounding as the light enveloped him. In that moment, he understood. The well had not just been a doorway for the Forgotten Ones. It was a barrier, a seal, and he was the key. He had to be the one to close it. The light surged, now brighter and stronger than he had ever seen before. It was all Eliezer could see, feel, or understand. The shadows shrieked in anguish, torn from him, unable to bear the light. The well shuddered with its power failing. Then, in a last sound that deafened the night, the darkness was done. Eliezer stood alone at the edge of the well, his body shaking with the effort. The village was silent. The whispers were gone. The weight that had pressed down on him for so long was lifted. But he knew deep inside that the battle was not over. The well had been sealed, but the Forgotten Ones were still out there, waiting. And someday, they would return. But for now, the world was safe. The nightmare had ended, and Eliezer had survived.